Welcome to this week's episode of the Lifting the Veil podcast with your host, myself, Adrienne Lopez, the Integrative Healing Coach. Thank you for joining me for soul healing conversations, guests, and topics that support you in unveiling the nature of your consciousness so you can embrace your destiny and not suffer your fate. If you hear something today that resonates with you, please don't forget to like, share, comment, or subscribe, as it really helps support the growth and reach of this podcast by increasing my listenership, which makes this whole endeavor possible. In the meantime, please sit back and relax. We'll get started in just a moment with this week's episode. Thanks for stopping by. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Lifting the Veil podcast with your host, myself, Adrienne Lopez, the Integrative Awareness Coach. How are you all doing today? Thanks so much for stopping by to take a listen, and I want to wish you a great day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're at the time this podcast meets you. And this week, the episode in which I'm going to be sharing with you is entitled Ancient Soil. And as many of my podcasts are inspired by my own intuitive work, my journey, information that's coming to me through the current energies at this time, conversations and the work that I do with individuals, and how it is showing up in my neck of the woods, let's say. Anyhow, to begin with, I want to let you know that I have this week run into the Rig Veda, which is one of the oldest Vedas, one of the most ancient texts, written texts on the planet. And the portion that came to my attention is through the hymn known as the Hymn of the Plants. So I wanted to talk to you about the energy that's showing up on the planet in the context of this Veda. So I want to read it to you because I think it's really telling. And forgive me, there is a siren going off in the background. So before I read you this, just a section of it, it's just verse 17 and 18, and it's just like maybe 7 or 8 lines. But it encompasses the idea of Soma, which has known as the body. But in yogic texts, it's even more nuanced. It's the most subtle form of prana, which is, I would say, the foundation of creation. So in this way, we have this soma or prana or the spirit, because it's non-physical, is planted into our bodies, which is the material. So the spirit is planted in the materiality of our body. And this, in this analogy, is what was sparked from reading this hymn of the plants. As I mentioned, one of the oldest ancient texts that we have. And it reads the following. Descending from the sky, the plants flew earthward. Thus they spoke. No evil shall befall the man whom while he liveth we pervade. Of all the many plants whose king is Soma, plants of 100 forms, thou art the plant most excellent, prompt to the wish, sweet to the heart. O all ye various herbs, whose king is Soma, that overspread the earth, urged onward by Prashapati, the god of fire, Agni, combine your virtue in this plant. And so, in this section, verses 17 and 18, it's presented as that the plants came forward. They came from the sky before humans even arrived here to remind us of our own nature, our Soma, our soul, the subtle cosmic energy, which is the intelligence, which is structured in our bodies and in our lives. And so our history is the history of nature. As Michael Meade, the famous storyteller and mythologist, says, there's two great stories on this planet. The first, or the primary story, is the drama of nature itself, of creation. And the secondary story is man's struggle in order to find his or her place in nature. And this whole theme that was showing up, or has been showing up in my life for some time now, in different modes and mediums, in different delightful synchronicities, in finding just the perfect hymn from the Rig Veda, from having a conversation with someone about the medicine of plants, and this huge pull in the mainstream for people to be engaging in plant medicine, and the whole disconnect of humanity from the natural cycles of nature that we don't even know, and it's been happening for so long that we don't even know what we've been missing. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about today, and something that I've called the ecology of the soul, through the lens, through the window of these short little verses from the Hymn of the Plants, because it reminded me of so many experiences that I've had through my life, and not necessarily with quote-unquote plant medicine, although nature definitely has been an incredible source of comfort and hospitality and healing for me. I spent most of my youth held by the Pacific Ocean, which I didn't realize at the time was an incredible gift, to be in her presence and to be held by her beauty, and that she was actually helping me process the things in my life that nobody else around me was able to, because they didn't have the awareness, the language, the technology, the know-how, the presence. So as I came upon this Veda, this Hymn of the Plants, it reminded me about the story of the plant kingdom, reminded me of the gnostic interpretation of self-realization and the idea of being soiled, or coming from darkness, and the whole analogy of the seed and the plant and the darkness. That is really our story, and how it's related to duality, and more specifically from the story of Christ and Lucifer. And in the Gnostic interpretation, Lucifer and Christ, depending on who you talk to, is two sides of the same coin, two aspects of the same vibration of consciousness. So in this way, this journey that we are all on, this spiritual growth, this development of understanding ourselves, our connection to others, our connections to the world, and the beauty of life that we get to witness every day, although we sometimes forget and get caught up in the mire, the clouded mirror, or the dirtied mirror. These ingrained patterns that we inherit from those around us, our communities, our caregivers, our institutions. So today I want to share a little bit about this idea actually presented in the Gnostic Gospels as a metaphor that may inspire you at this time on this planet as we are, as you look out into the world. At least I don't know about you, but we have wildfires, earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, natural disasters, wars. And if you didn't know better, it might look very chaotic and you might become disheartened by what you see. So this is a different way of thinking about or imagining your role in what's unfolding on this planet right now as we step into this huge transition and awakening of our own humanity, a blooming of a new level of consciousness that hasn't existed on this planet before, and that you're here to witness this unfold. And so as I share a little bit of this Gnostic interpretation, which I think provides an extremely powerful example of what's happening right now, I'm reminded of one of my followers who saw one of my posts on my social media, and I can't remember exactly what it was. It might have been a biblical reference. But she said to me, "Oh, I didn't know you were so religious." And it occurred to me that not everyone realizes, of course, understandably, that I am not actually particularly religious in a traditional sense, but I do pull from any sacred text that teaches love. And so if I am any religion, it is a religion of love. And there's many scholarly texts, many sacred texts that hold innate wisdom. And so I share them because they're valuable to me in that way. So I guess I'm saying this as kind of a preface as to not alarm you as I reference the Christ consciousness. And the reason why I mention this is because I too was raised in a certain particular view of the church and Christianity. And so I have a lot of triggers, let's say, when I hear somebody talk about God or Christ. And so I just want to say that I'm using this story to illustrate a universal truth that cannot be reduced to any one religion or any one tradition, because it belongs to all of humanity. And with that being said, the way this interpretation goes is that when the Christ consciousness, which is the fire of life, descends into the body through the Holy Spirit, which could be considered this subtle form of Soma. It comes into the body, it becomes dirtied or soiled by the material world, and as I mentioned, man's rules, institutions, man's law, let's just say. And when that Christ consciousness enters into the material world, into the body, it becomes known as Lucifer. And many of you may already know this, that Luce is the Latin for light. And so Lucifer is known as the light bringer. And Christ is also referred to as the light of the world. So Lucifer begins to represent that aspect of ourselves that is ruled by the intellect, the individual intellect, which continually tries to rebel against natural law, or the primary law, the first story of nature, which I mentioned Michael Meade had identified, and attempts, and this Luciferian part of ourselves, we could call it the individual personality or the ego, attempts to maintain itself contrary to everything around it, the natural impulse of life flowing through itself. And so it begins to be at war. The personality begins to be at war with its own nature, which causes a lot of different symptoms and disease and confusion. But it is through this process that the soul begins to remember its true essence, or its intelligence, the Soma. And in this way, the body is pure intelligence of the life principle, let's say, that is not separated through the mind, which causes it to disconnect from source or the supreme being, whatever you want to call all that is, the architect of this beautiful world that we live in, and the life that thousands of different species, as the hymn of the plants mentions, lives here through the streams of the Soma. And so through this process, this Luciferian process, and this separation from self, is the thing that allows us to slowly become aware of our true nature, as we begin to clean the mirrors of our hearts, let's say. And it is the Luciferian experience, this duality of the separation of mind, that we receive the opportunity to discover or rediscover our true nature, and to actually choose with our own will to return to the fullness of who we are, to purify, cleanse our soul, and return to the service of the highest, most natural state of our humanity, also known as the truth of the way, the Christos, the light of the world. And in this case, literally speaking, a light is information, is intelligence. And so the darkened one that comes from the soiled sense of self is an ancient mirror. It has been here for as long as humans have, I'm sure. It is the thing that consciousness grows out from. It grows from the world and its rules and its laws, and the belief that it is primary, contrary to the truth. But in this disconnect, in this ignorance, we are offered an opportunity to awaken and grow into the fruition and fullness of our soul and our own being. So the way this story is told is that when the Christ energy of life enters into this duality, it automatically forgets. But that is the journey. That is the process. That is consciousness waking up to its own magnificence that can only happen through the forgetting. So I like to think of this as an opportunity to celebrate, or as I like to say, celebrate. We are reminding ourselves, we are refiguring ourselves, reminding ourselves, our plant-based bodies, how to step into a higher manifestation and expression of who we are. And for many people that are living in the darkened world or the shadow world of the ancient soil, there's no judgment on this at all. It's simply a part of development. And some seeds get stuck and refuse to grow. But the natural process cannot be stepped over eventually, because it is the divine pattern. It's going to be victorious. And so I mention this because without the awareness, we're following unconscious patterns. And these unconscious patterns are vibrating at the level of our awareness. And until we begin to increase or elevate the light of our awareness, what we begin to see, then it's difficult to change the patterns. But they come hand in hand. It's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, the consciousness or the patterns? They're connected. And so this is where a level of faith is required, where just like the seed, we must choose to surrender our husk, in this case, our ego, our personality, to the soil, to let it go where it belongs. What do they say? When in Rome, or something like that. Things belong with their kind. The ego belongs with the soil because it is part of the soil. And so when we begin to drop instead of fight and resist our journey, then we can grow and experience something new. We can metamorphosize and be reborn by the light, just like a seed in the ground needs water. It needs the heat of the sun, the light of the sun in order to sprout. We are not all that different. This is the natural alchemy. And interestingly enough, in that passage that I read to you earlier from the Rig Veda, the passage refers to Brahaspati, which is the Hindu god of fire, Agni. And it also contains the reference to Soma, which is this most subtle form of cosmic plasma, this prana, this Shakti, which has been identified with water. And it is that which burns up the shadow of the false self, the fire and the water working together, the life force and that which feeds the life force, which is the water, which allows the seed to burn up the husk. In this case, it would be our ego, for instance. And so, as in, let's say, in the world of the yogic reference, the 8 limbs of yoga, one of them is the yoga of perception, or jnana yoga. And this is where it's also known as the yoga of knowledge, where there is the seer. In this case, this is the Agni, the fire, the spark of life, and the Soma, which is all that is seen. And seen in this case has a fiery quality, and it works through our ability to absorb the light. And the scene is the field that is illuminated by the light. And when consciousness begins to acknowledge its active participation in this entire process of creation, it is the awareness that there is only light or consciousness can be reflected externally. It's our own awareness being mirrored back to us. And our very power of seeing is a power of the fire, the Agni. And while all we say is Soma, it becomes the fuel, as I mentioned. And then this awareness results in the bliss of realization of the union of consciousness, and that there is actually only one between the subject and object. And the disconnect has largely, according to, in my opinion, Christianity. I mean, for example, in the Tao, we have the yin and the yang, and it's all one, and it can't be divided. But in Christianity, they took the cycles of life and demonized one aspect. The dark aspect became related to hell and the devil, or Lucifer. And if one believes themselves to be a good person, then they can know nothing about hell. And this, of course, is not the case. Life happens, just like the seasons and the plants have their cycles of death and life. So do we. And there are daily cycles in a larger cycle. And if we are excluding one aspect of the life cycle, then we're going to have a distorted view of our own evolution and our relationship to life and nature itself. And this is a level, as I mentioned in one of my posts last week, the ignorance in which Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras spoke about ignorance, ignoring the truth of who you are. And I love fairy tales, I love myths, I love storytelling, because it is so rich and it contains so much knowledge and wisdom and awareness of the predicament that human consciousness has found itself in, and an inability to see that it's in it. So I like the example told about Little Red Riding Hood when she goes to visit her grandmother, and she says, "Oh, grandmother, what big teeth you have." And she says, "Oh, grandmother, what a big snout you have." And she never puts it together, right? She's describing the characteristics of a wild animal or a wolf, but she's not aware of what she's seeing. So she's able to describe what she sees, but she can't realize or recognize that there's danger. And so what happens when the human nervous system related to consciousness cannot determine what's safe, what's not safe? In other words, what is a balanced way to live? What is homeostasis? And nature does this without a thought, because it doesn't have a personality to argue with. It just flows with the impulse of life. And this is truly what we're being called back to, this process that nature does automatically. Its intelligence embodied in the structure of itself, in the tree, in the plant, in the body. And many people's bodies are having a lot of symptoms right now, as a literal cellular remembering is occurring, a sort of spiritual fire, which has been referred to as the burning of sanskaras. And sanskaras are karmic patterns that have structured our bodies, but they start at a mental level, and the mental level becomes densified and then becomes structured into our bodies. And if you know anything about Ayurvedic or Chinese medicine or other quote-unquote alternative health perspectives, we have ley lines throughout our entire bodies, the nadis that circulate life energy through our bodies like sap through a tree. I think there are like 84,000 energy nadis according to yogic philosophy. And they're in the process of being purified with the light, the authentic knowledge of what is called Shakti in the yogic texts. And she is re-enlivening our bodies so that we may contain the optimal expression of our life energy. And so I mentioned this because I'm not sure how your body is doing. As I mentioned, I've spoken to others. I know personally it's been a challenge as my body has been reacting in many ways, in lots of different ways, through utter exhaustion, nerve tingling, pain, headaches, digestive issues, and a whole list of seemingly random symptoms. But I'm sharing all of this with you because I don't want you, if you've been suffering with different symptoms and maybe feeling really disheartened, I'm sharing this message with you because we are all in a process of transformation, and it goes down to, as I mentioned, a cellular level, and that's why I mentioned celebrating. We are celebrating this transformation, even in the discomfort of these physical sanskaras that are embedded in not only our physical bodies, but our etheric field through time, not just this lifetime, but it's in our DNA that we've inherited. It has been pushed deeply into the organic material of our DNA. And so it's being flushed out. It's being cleaned. It's being burned through the fire of memory as this dirtied mirror of our hearts is becoming clean, if we choose, if we're ready to drop the husk of the soil into the soil, to return, to regain access to this inheritance that is mentioned in the Hymn of the Plants, this glory of creation that the plants were here to remind us of in case we forgot. And in this way, this is your cosmic inheritance. You are the light. You are the light one, the spirit in the body, without disconnection, without distortion. And it is time to transcend this soiled field of duality and step into the light field, which is all around us when we learn and remember how to tune into it. So I think I will leave it there for now. I hate to get too technical about the yogic aspects of it because not everyone may be familiar with the yogic philosophy, but I'll just say that in yoga, the yogic traditions teach us that at the crown chakra, it's the region of the moon or the Soma or the Chandra, which means moon in Sanskrit. And in our lower three chakras, we have the region of the Agni, which is the fire. So Soma, as according to the Vedas, flows in 1,000 streams into our bodies. And these thousands of currents of the crown chakra, the 1,000-petal lotus that represents it, if you've seen the drawings of the Sahasrara chakra, and physiologically, Agna, with a fire, relates to our solar plexus and our bottom 3 chakras. And so, just like the moon energy at the top of our head relates to water, we have our saliva, we have our tears. The fire comes from the lower energy centers or vortexes to meet so that there is a full embodiment and a remembering of these life impulses that were meant to flow through our body before we were taught away from our being. And I mention this in regards to, for example, when we are first showing up on the planet as these innocent little babies, we don't have the distinction of me, you, good or bad, right or wrong. We are just purely fluid in the presence of life as it is unfolding, and we are taught into our categories, our thinking, our separation through the mind. And this is the metaphor of the Luciferian energy, which separates nature from itself and then forgets that it is separate. And we are remembering now. And in that way, this whole process is a reminder, a waking up to not just half of who we are, but the full intelligence, and that our body is actually a map of that consciousness, and that when we are having symptoms or ailments or dis-ease, the body is reflecting our own consciousness, because the subtle form creates the density of our body. They're connected. As I said, the spirit is planted in the body, and they're one. And so I will be talking probably next week. I might be having a special guest for next week on the podcast, but we'll see. I haven't confirmed it yet. But she will be showing up soon to discuss all things plant medicine and the whole history of plant medicine and how the role it's playing in the awakening process right now. I find it really super fascinating topic. As those of you that have followed me in regards to the coursework that I've been doing with people, Force of Nature, and providing practices and tools to remember the full embodiment of our nature, to create that unity between the body, the mind, the heart. But I definitely want to do a podcast on how do we consciously support ourselves in anchoring that level of consciousness in our body. What practices and tools can we use to support ourselves and others on this journey? So I think I'm going to leave it there. So until next time, please remember what a valuable treasure you are. And if you heard something today that resonated with you and lit you up or made you say, please leave a comment, like, share, subscribe. it makes a difference in the increase in my listenership, which allows me to continue this weekly podcast. So I appreciate your support in advance, and thank you. I know there's a lot that you can listen to, and I appreciate your time to stopping by and taking a listen. And of course, I always value your feedback, your questions, and your comments. And my contact information is always in the description of the podcast, where you can reach out, ask questions, or find out more about my work. And my website is also included in the description. All right. Until next time, see you guys. Thanks again. Bye for now.